Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. It's the biggest story right now in the world of college football, in the world of college sports. It is what is going on at Florida, who is going to take that job, and will it be Lane Kiffin? Okay, so listen, when we signed off for the full show on Sunday, we kept saying we're on Billy Napier watch. About an hour after we got off air, Billy Napier was officially fired. We did a reaction. We're not going to spend time here talking about Billy Napier. All I will say about that situation, since we went off air on Sunday, a lot of players posting pictures and videos with him on recruiting visits, whatever. It was clear that he was beloved by those players. And I think there's everyone in Florida, from Billy Napier, Scott Strickland, the AD on down, is bummed that it didn't work out. You look at basically the way the players are acting now. You could tell that they loved him. You could tell that they cared. It's kind of funny. To me, it has a little bit of Sam Pittman vibes, whereas maybe you look at an LSU, it doesn't feel like anybody really likes Brian Kelly, okay? But Billy Napier is out. The biggest problem, his downfall, I'm sure there's going to be at some point a long form from The Athletic or from, ESPN or whatever. Guy just wouldn't stop calling plays. And he had he was a bad offensive coordinator. I think the best way that I saw it put was pretty straightforward. Somebody said Billy Napier could have been a really good head coach at Florida. The problem was he was too busy wanting to be an offensive coordinator. So you work your whole life to be a head coach, but you want to be an offensive coordinator instead. And I know it's a little bit of a hot button issue. Steve Sarkisian was actually asked on Monday about calling plays as Arch Manning is struggling. So it's always a push-pull with play callers, whatever. But Billy Napier is out, and now the focus is on who will be the next head coach at Florida. Listen, on Sunday, we did the full reaction. We talked about all the different candidates. We talked about Eli Drinkowitz. We talked about Jed Fish. We talked about, is Marcus Freeman available? What about a John Gruden? This and that. But we all know that the focus of the search centers on one man and one man in particular, and it is the guy, if you are watching on YouTube, that you see on your screen. The focus is on Lane Kiffin. Now, the question is, does he want the job? Would he actually leave Ole Miss? Well, I'll tell you this. We're going to get to an interesting story I saw in a second, but I thought even before Billy Napier was officially fired, we saw something interesting from the Ole Miss AD that led me to believe that maybe, just maybe, old Lane Kiffin's got a little bit of a wandering eye and that the Florida job absolutely intrigues him, maybe in a way that a lot of other jobs have not. Thought this was interesting. So remember, late Thursday after we get off air, Curt Cignetti signs that massive extension at Indiana. And the insinuation is $93 million, third highest paid coach in college football. And Curt Cignetti's like, I want to retire at Indiana. I don't want to be in a Penn State search, a Florida search if it opens. No. I am the Indiana football coach. I will be here as long as they want me. Well, I bring it up because on Friday, I thought it was a very interesting timed article, interview, and quote. Keith Carter, the AD at Ole Miss, actually did a sit down with the Ole Miss On 3 set. I believe it's called Ole Miss Spirit or something to that effect. And he was basically asked about kind of the situation with Lane Kiffin, and he referenced Curt Cignetti. And he said something to the effect, we'll take that tweet whenever, Matt. Basically, Keith Carter, the AD, said to the reporter that he was speaking with, quote, I'd love to get something done like Indiana did with Curt Cignetti before the silly season starts. We'll see. What was interesting about that quote to me was a couple things. I think, one, I saw a few people insinuate, whoa, Ole Miss is getting a deal done with Lane Kiffin. Look at that. They're getting it done. He's not going to be a candidate. He's staying at Ole Miss for the long term. That's not how I read that article at all. Okay, so first of all, he said, I'd like to, as in, I want to work on it. I want to get something done. This is our guy. We want him to be the Ole Miss coach as long as he wants to be here. What was the other interesting thing is that he added at the end, we'll see. So to me, I don't think this is we're in negotiations. We're on the 1 yard line. We're about to announce something tomorrow. I thought it was sort of the exact opposite. I thought what it actually was that AD kind of telling the public, going to one of the biggest outlets who covers that team, hey, look, we'll see. but I'm doing everything that I can. And if Lane Kiffin is not the Ole Miss head coach on January 1st or the first time that we walk out of the tunnel at Vaught Hemingway Stadium, like, it ain't on me. I did everything I could. And so to me, that was the first real domino that was like, oh, this is starting to get interesting. What got even more interesting was on Tuesday or Monday afternoon, CBS Sports went ahead and published an article. The author, John Talty, he's been all over these big stories, especially in SEC country. Matt, what was the name of the article that was referenced by CBS Sports? It was called, quote, Florida's first call. It's about the Florida coaching search, not surprising. Florida's first call should be to Lane Kiffin. The tea leaf says he's intrigued. All right, so let's go ahead and break down this article because I thought there were a lot of very interesting points, some of which we've discussed, some of which we haven't. And I think what's interesting about Lane Kiffin, I want to reference this before we get to the actual quotes from the article, is, listen, if you're a college football fan and you're tired of seeing Lane Kiffin's name in all of these searches, I kind of sort of get it, right? I mean, listen, it's our job in the media. It's our job, people who cover this sport, to talk about what we're hearing, what we think, whatever. But it does feel like Lane Kiffin's name has been in all of these searches. Now, I think some of the searches he hasn't been interested in. I think some places like Alabama the last time things opened, like LSU the last time things opened, like Florida the last time things opened, really weren't maybe as interested in Lane Kiffin as he might have been in them. But this one feels different. Let's get to the John Talty article. Matt, you could pop up the first part of that article. This is from CBS Sports, John Talty. First of all, I thought this was an interesting thing, not surprising, but worth referencing. This, according to CBS Sports. Even before Sunday's firing of Billy Napier, the Florida AD had been doing his due diligence on the Ole Miss coach this season and made calls to those around Kiffin, sources told CBS. There are risks involved with hiring Lane Kiffin, one of the most unique personalities in the sport, and industry sources who know Strickland have previously speculated to CBS Sports the AD might be hesitant to strongly pursue him. That has shifted this coaching cycle, according to sources, as Kiffin has emerged as the name boosters and fans want most. The article continues. Life is good in Oxford for Lane. He's more at peace there than he's ever been and seems to truly appreciate what he has at Ole Miss in a way the younger version of him was incapable. But that competitive spirit still burns brightly inside of him. There aren't many, if any, jobs that could pull Lane Kiffin away from Ole Miss at this point, but Florida is on the very short list of jobs that would at least make him consider leaving. Lane is well aware of the strong tradition and fan support Florida has, and there are some who know him who believe he is more than intrigued with the idea of being the spiritual successor of Steve Spurrier. Finally, last little part, by the way, it's a long article, so I apologize for ripping off so much of it, but I want to make sure that I share full context here before I talk about it. This is the important part. The question Lane Kiffin will have to ask himself is whether greatness is possible in Oxford. He has reestablished the Rebels as a nationally relevant program. It is 50-19. Midway through his sixth season, For comparison's sake, his predecessor, Matt Luke, went 15-21 in 3 seasons. Kiffin has been wildly successful at Ole Miss and has yet to fully break through. Ole Miss just missed making the playoff a year ago, and ironically did so in part because the Rebels lost to Billy Napier's Florida Gators. Ole Miss looks poised to make the playoffs this season, which could change the equation for Kiffin, though the Rebels can't afford to lose more than another game, maybe 2, after the loss to Georgia on Saturday. So that was all via John Talty, CBS. He does a great job on that SEC beat. A couple things stand out to that. First of all, can we stop with it would be tough to, there's reasons not to hire Lane Kiffin. Listen, I get the notion, let me see, Matt, put up the original, the first graphic, please. I apologize. I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head. Okay. So, Florida's AD has been doing due diligence on the Ole Miss coach this season. There are risks involved with hiring Kiffin, one of the most unique personalities in the sport. First of all, can we stop with that narrative? Listen, I think that narrative was probably true 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly when he was at Tennessee, certainly when he was with the Oakland Raiders at the time. I don't think that there's that much risk in terms of off-the-field stuff with Lane Kiffin. Listen, is he known to go to a hot yoga class now from time to time? If we have that picture, Matt, I would love to have it up right now. That's what he was doing on Saturday. That is from Lane Kiffin's official Twitter account. He did do a hot yoga class before the Georgia game in Athens. But listen, he's very public about the fact that he doesn't drink alcohol anymore. And I'm not here to judge anybody who drinks alcohol because I certainly drink plenty of my own. Doesn't drink alcohol anymore. His daughter's in college. His son is in high school. Like, I don't think this is like 36-year-old Lane Kiffin that was, maybe a little bit of a distraction off the field in Knoxville or in LA when he was an OC at US. I don't think that's who he is anymore. But I do think the crux of the conversation that John Talty brings up is an important one. And that is he going to leave Ole Miss for Florida? Because there are pluses and minuses at both. In terms of the positives at Ole Miss, listen, he's built it into something special. He's built it into something that, frankly, I think most of us didn't think anyone would be able to do, let alone Lane Kiffin. 3 10-win seasons. I think the stat that still stands out to me, they had never had a 10-win regular season before Lane Kiffin got there. He has had 2 since he got there before the 2020 season, I guess it would have been. 2 10-win seasons. Last year, they got to 10 wins, 9-3 in the regular season, and it was actually seen as a little bit of a disappointment that they only went 9-3. By the way, they're currently 6-1 and very much trending to again be in the playoff conversation, again potentially have that 10-win mark. And I'll tell you what, if they get to 10 wins, they're going to get to the college football playoff. The game at Oklahoma this weekend will be tough, but I think once you get beyond that, there are wins on the schedule. Ironically, Florida at home, Mississippi State is improved, but is that a team that's going to beat Ole Miss? We don't know. But I just bring it up because he's done about as well as anyone could have expected at Ole Miss. But I think the big question, and John Talty references that in the article, has he hit a ceiling at Ole Miss? Listen, whatever you think of Florida, like, it's funny, I'll say this with Florida. I think there's now this revisionist history of how good the job is because Billy Napier wasn't a success, this after Dan Mullen, this after whatever. And it's been 4 coaches since Florida really nailed a coaching hire with Urban Meyer, okay? And I think that's the knock on Florida. People say, well, guess what? They've really only had 2 great coaches in the history of their program. Yeah, and those 2 great coaches proved that if you know what you're doing, you can win a national championship with the Florida Gators, okay? By the way, it's no different anywhere else. What was Alabama before Nick Saban? LSU, it's easy to forget, before, ironically, Nick Saban as well. That was a program that could not get out of its own way. So I could go on and on, but you look at the Florida situation, it's not as bad as people think. And in many ways, it's actually much better than people think. I looked this up because I couldn't believe it. I saw this stat because Billy Napier, whatever. We're not here to crap on Billy Napier. It is what it is. But prior to Billy Napier, we look at Dan Mullen, Jim McElwain, and Will Muschamp as 3 failures as head coaches. And I don't think it's wrong to look at them that way. Do you know that each of them had a 10-win season during their time at Florida, and some of them had multiple 10-win seasons? Dan Mullen, multiple 10-win seasons, played for an SEC title. Jim McElwain, multiple SEC championship game appearances, including a 10-win season. Will Muschamp even had a 10-win season at Florida, okay? So if Will Muschamp could have a 10-win season at Florida, it shows you that even when things are bad, they're not as bad as people think they are. And I think that's the part that people are missing. This Florida job is so much better than I think a lot of people realize because it just hasn't reached its potential in close to 20 years now since Urban Meyer left, since Tim Tebow left, since all those guys left. And so this notion that it's not a good job, no, it's just waiting for the right person. And to quote John Talty, Lane Kiffin could be the spiritual successor to Steve Spurrier. And so I think that's going to be the interesting thing to follow. This is clearly a job that intrigues him. The AD very clearly at Ole Miss is trying to get something done. But like I said, I think publicly the AD is trying to distance himself from, like, if this doesn't get done, I don't want to get blamed for it. I'm not losing my job because Lane Kiffin, this was a job that he was interested in. And I think we also have to acknowledge a few other things. One, I get this notion, and you just saw it on the screen, of like, well, life is great in Oxford and he's at peace. He is at peace, and good for him. And I'm happy for him that he is as happy as he's ever been in his personal life. But let's not act like he's never been interested in other jobs, okay? Nearly left for Auburn in 2022. That story has been well told at this point. Alabama, I think he would have crawled over glass to get the Alabama job, and Greg Byrne just wasn't interested in him. So the notion that he's not going to take other good jobs if they become available, I just don't know that I currently buy it. The other thing too, as I said a second ago, it's just easier to win at Florida. It just is. And I always in a situation like this go back to the Herm Edwards quote. You play to win the game. More resources, more money, bigger state population, more high school players. And listen, what he's done at Ole Miss is incredible, but how many times can you rebuild through the portal year over year over year and hope that you hit with the right guys? I'll take it a step further. You hope that the right guys even enter the portal. I mean, part of what made last season so interesting, Jimbo Fisher gets fired at Texas A&M. Walter Nolan is available. There's not a Walter Nolan available every year. There's not a Jackson Dart available every year. And so to do what he's done is incredible, but there is an easier path. I mean, look at, and I know it's not a perfect example, but look at Kalen DeBoer. I mean, Kalen DeBoer took over the best roster that he ever had the second that he walked into Alabama. Brian Kelly, I wouldn't say had the most talented roster, but he had pieces the likes of which he never had at Notre Dame. And so if you're Lane Kiffin, it's something I do think you have to think about. And lastly, I'll say this. For all the criticism of Billy Napier, and I think it's 100% justified, I think we also have to acknowledge he left the cupboard pretty full. And the one thing you can't say, and Scott Strickland, the AD at Florida, even said it at his press conference on Monday. He did have a press availability. He said, Billy left this situation much better than he found it. And I think there's a lot of coaches that say stuff like that and ADs that say stuff like that after a coach gets fired. I think with Billy Napier, we have to give credit where it's due, and we have to acknowledge that he did, in fact, do that. DJ Lagway, at least for a couple weeks, has committed his future to Florida. I was told, listen, you can say what you want about me. You can like me. You cannot like me. You can say I'm an idiot, whatever. I do have some pretty good people in and around Florida football. And I was kind of told that they are already having conversations, and I'm not surprised by this. This isn't some incredible breaking news, but they are deep in conversations with guys like DJ Lagway. And I'm not saying DJ Lagway is going to have a say in who the next head coach is, but if you don't think that they're selling him on, these are the guys that we're going after, you are the number one piece to retain, you don't know what you're talking about. And so the one thing with Lane Kiffin, the one thing with any candidate, you walk into that situation. I mean, there's a reason some people thought Florida was a national not a national championship, but a playoff contender this year. DJ Lagway, Jaden Ball, that running back is a dog. I said it on Twitter the other day. I said, it's a shame that Billy Napier can't get out of his own way calling plays because there is so much talent on that roster. The defense is elite. DJ Lagway, I know he hasn't looked good this year. Put him with Lane Kiffin. I think you're going to have some problems. Jaden Ball is only a sophomore. Dallas Wilson, the true freshman that just got healthy, is a beast. You go on and on down this list. There is so much talent on this roster. And I think you could legitimately argue that if Lane Kiffin or anybody, but we're talking Lane Kiffin, if all Lane Kiffin did was walk in and retain literally every guy on the roster, he has a playoff contender next year and probably at minimum the second most talented roster that he's ever been a head coach for outside of maybe last year's Ole Miss Rebels. And I think even Ole Miss, you could argue, was top to bottom not as talented as this Florida team. So we'll see what happens. Only Lane Kiffin knows, but I thought that article was very interesting. Lane Kiffin, the lead candidate at Florida, and as CBS Sports says, maybe even more interested than we realized. We'll see what happens from here. It'll be interesting, and we will certainly be talking about it as we get deeper and deeper into this coaching search.